G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Arr. Reading from New Scientist magazine, 9 June 2018. Beginning page 34. What motivates far-right extremism? Sociological studies are giving new insights and ways to tackle the phenomenon. Peter Byrne investigates. Tim Zale hurt a lot of people in his time. Blacks, Mexicans, gays. Strung out on drugs and propaganda, he fitted the toes of his engineer boots with razor blades, all the better to kick the scum and save the white race. Zale has since recounted, but others continue to follow in his bootsteps. After decades largely under the radar, race-based violence and extremism is back in the news. In June 2015, white supremacist Dylan Roof killed 9 black worshippers at a Methodist church in Charleston, South Carolina. In August 2017, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia saw youths on the streets giving Nazi salutes and one counter-protester killed, deliberately mown down by a car. It's not just in the US. In June 2016, British politician Joe Cox was murdered by a white nationalist. Last November, tens of thousands rallied by torchlight in Warsaw, Poland, waving banners that advocated deporting refugees and making Europe white again, while chanting Sieg Heil in the once Nazi-occupied land where Auschwitz was built. For the most, the motivations of such hate seem unimaginable. But pioneering work in the US is beginning to reveal its roots. What it is uncovering turns a conventional view of terrorist motivations on its head, with implications for how all societies should deal with the phenomenon. It's a cold night in January, and I'm eating hamburgers with Zale in a mall restaurant at the border of Orange County and Los Angeles. A big affable man in his early 50s. He talks easily about his life as a violent white supremacist during the 1980s and 1990s. Also at the table is Pete Simi, a sociologist at Chapman University in the city of Orange who researches white supremacist extremism. Simi first met Zale when he disengaged from organised racism at the turn of the millennium. Since then, Simi has interviewed Zale about his life history, as he has done scores of active and former far-right extremists. The two have common acquaintances and casually drop names. Did you know that so-and-so is dead? Unquote. White supremacism has a long tradition in the US. From the 1860s, after the Southern Confederate States lost the US Civil War, white workers found themselves competing with freed slaves for economic resources and social status. The backlash was often murderous. Thousands of black men, women, and children were lynched, shot, stabbed, tortured, and burned alive, and their property often expropriated with impunity. Racial segregation was the law of the land, not just in the agrarian South, but also in the industrial North, as millions of black people fled the cotton fields for factory ghettos. By 1925, membership of the Ku Klux Klan approached 6 million. About 5% of the US population. Orange County is best known as the home of the Disneyland theme park. Its affluent suburbs were long a bastion of old-school Republican conservatism. Richard Nixon was born there, and it is where Ronald Reagan kick-started his political career. Until the 1970s, the country was almost exclusively white, before African American, Hispanic, and Asian incomers changed its complexion. Like similar places nationwide, Orange County became a centre of a small but hardcore white supremacist backlash. Zale viewed himself as a patriot fighting against a Jewish-orchestrated plot to commit genocide on the white race. We saw it as doing what the police wouldn't do, he says. We were cleaning up our neighbourhoods of the scum, unquote. Just days before I met Zale, white supremacist Samuel Woodward was charged with stabbing to death a Jewish gay man called Blaze Bernstein, whose body was found buried in an Orange County park. Woodward has pleaded not guilty to the charge. The murder was cheered online by Woodward's comrades in the neo-Nazi group Atom Waffen Division. In the wake of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Charlottesville, counter-terrorism expert Errol Southers at the University of Southern California wrote an opinion article for USA Today which linked the violence to Donald Trump's radicalised rhetoric. The next day, someone shot out his front door. Southers is black, a retired FBI agent. He teaches courses on homegrown terrorism to law enforcers. White nationalists are a greater threat to Americans than jihadists, he says. The Anti-Defamation League reports that in the US, white supremacists were responsible for 18 of 34 terrorist murders in 2017. 7 of the remaining 16 were anti-government extremists, leaving 9 tied to the Islamist terrorism. Since 2002, there have been 3 times as many deadly far-right terrorist attacks than jihadist attacks in the US, although the jihadist attacks have claimed more victims overall, reports the New America Foundation. In the UK, in the year to March 2017, right-wing extremists made up around 1 in 6 of over 6,000 referrals to the country's counter-extremism program, PREVENT, and almost 40% of 332 people entering PREVENT's, quote, channel, unquote, process, which supports individuals considered vulnerable to be drawn into terrorism. In February this year, police said that they had foiled 4 right-wing terrorist plots in the UK in the previous 12 months. In the US, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which monitors hate groups, has catalogued more than 600 active neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups and hundreds of anti-government militias that either have a stated intention to overthrow liberal democracy or historically engaged in armed struggle. Southers sees similarities between the white extremist and Islamist terrorists. Both fit the prevailing notion among researchers that most terrorists are not psychopaths, but relatively typical people motivated by circumstances to protect their, quote, in-group, unquote, from dangers, real or imagined. Quote, given their belief systems, both types of terrorists are acting rationally, unquote, he says. Quote, most terrorists are altruists who view themselves as soldiers fighting for a noble cause, unquote. The calling to enact political change precedes the calling to violence. The ends justify the means. However, Simi's research suggests that's not the whole story. Verbatim quotes from Pete Simi's interviews with current and former white supremacists. Simi and I are hiking with Chuck, not his real name, on a rocky beach north of San Diego. Chuck is a 50-year-old electrician who used to advocate Christian identity, the idea that white Europeans are the lost tribe of Israel. As an adolescent, Chuck listened to white power punk, hung out with swastika-tattooed neo-Nazi bikers, and was into weed, amphetamines, LSD, magic mushrooms, and alcohol. He was discharged from the US Navy after he was sentenced for assaulting a Mexican man for being Mexican, he adds. On release from prison, Chuck joined the San Diego branch of the Hammer-Skin Nation, an ultraviolet neo-Nazi group with international branches. He ran in the same head-slamming circles as Zal, but he was more enamoured of the cross than the swastika. Quote, I did not consider myself to be a National Socialist, but a Christian patriot ready to start a race war and take the country back from the Jewish communists, unquote. As Chuck grew older, raising a family, he began distancing himself from violent extremism. There was no blinding light, just a fading of interest until one day he no longer believed in a world conspiracy. He has been active with Life After Hate, a group that offers off-ramps and counselling to far-right extremists who want to heal. Simi has a professional background in mental health assessment. His interviewees start by talking about themselves in an unstructured way to uncover their life priorities and emotional impulses. This is followed by more structured factual questioning about past events which probes subjects' emotional motivations. It is rare to get such an insight into the minds of those who hold these kinds of extreme views. When terrorist suspects are interviewed about their past, it's usually by intelligence and police agencies, often in prison, and with a focus on ideology and operational methods. Simi and his team record the emotions associated with events the subjects mention, such as family traumas, hurting people, or joining or leaving a violent group. They can then determine the intensity of pleasure or pain the events evoked, as revealed in the language used. The results are digitised for statistical analysis to uncover the extent of shared motivations between the people he interviews. The aim is to avoid fitting the data to pre-existing theories of causes and effects. Good idea, eh? The first results from this program were laid out in 2016 in a 260-page paper from the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism (START), principally authored by Simi, with the title, quote, Recruitment and Radicalisation Among US Far-Right Terrorists. The analysis revealed that white extremists, while not necessarily psychopathic, are often violent before they join extremist groups. Only after joining are they generally schooled in ideologies that justify channeling pre-existing urges into violence towards Jewish people, non-white people, and anti-racist groups. The ideology is the excuse for ultra-violence, not the reason. Quote, far-right ideologies channel a pre-existing need to express violence by narrowing the selection of victims, unquote, says Simi. That insight challenges thinking on the origins of extremism, says ethnographer Kathleen Blee at the University of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, whose research focuses on female white supremacists, women of the right. White nationalism is often portrayed as a male affair. But while most white supremacist organisations hold that God created women to cook, clean the house and make babies, that doesn't mean they're wallflowers, says Kathleen Blee of the University of Pittsburgh. Male leadership in white nationalist organisations is often dependent on the adoration of followers. Female influence is more informal, direct and impersonal, so potentially more effective, she says. Researching her 1991 book, Women of the Klan, Racism and Gender in the 1920s, Blee found that millions of middle-class white women, including suffragettes, joined the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan supported voting whites for white women to diminish the electoral power of non-white people. It is a pattern repeated among women Blee has interviewed who are involved with today's white power, skinhead, Christian identity, neo-Nazi and Ku Klux Klan groups. Most of them are educated, middle class, and were raised in relatively typical families. Ideology is not the primary attraction for joining what many initially view as a social club, a place to have fun. Some women find the violent images of racist culture to be personally empowering. Quote, it gives them a feeling of mastery and of female potency, however illusory, that they rarely find in other social settings, unquote, says Blee. Once inside an organisation, women are socialised to adopt the idea that white people are at risk of extermination and must fight back, bracket, and produce more babies, close bracket, before it is too late. The racist movement can construct an ideology of extraordinary racism by using dystopian themes from everyday discourse, says Blee. Take a seemingly race-free slogan such as, quote, family values are under attack, unquote. What distinguishes this sentiment in the mouths of extremist women is not the belief that the family is dying, but who they believe are responsible for its downfall. Jewish people, black people, Mexicans, gay men, lesbians, and liberals. Okay, we're on the uploading of the limit. We're only about halfway in, so here endeth part 1. I shall return momentarily. Arr.